Але це не так.
Ні,
А що ви?
це не квадрат.
Ladies and gentlemen, and first of all, thank you for your presence here, our friends of Ukraine. Only because of your solidarity, only because of your support, we can do what is doing our country and our brave army during these 3 years. And what is the most important for me? I try to explain some few words about myself. I am rector of Ukrainian Free University, and our Ukrainian Free University is a great example of this history, struggle, and main 3 words of our today event. You see, security, policy, and culture. All the 3 words are the sense of our university. We know that our Ukrainian immigration wave, it's 6 waves of Ukrainian immigration, and 4 of them during the war. But it doesn't mean that we are victims. It means that we are fighters. Fighters for the whole world, common values of independence, of freedom, of equal rights, well-being of the people, and what is the most important, as I think, for happy life for each individual in the whole world. But during this event, I want, first of all, after thanks to you, I want to grateful of the Munich Security Conference, which support our public activities and traditionally invite our panel discussion at the external event of the Munich Security Conference. Thank you so much. The next, our thanks to the level panelists who are very close friends of our country, who are quite important person with their point of view, with their even input in the struggle against Russian barbarism. And what is said, my absolutely special thanks, as I tried to explain from the beginning, to each of you, because only of your efforts, because only of your solidarity, and because only of your presence in our fighting, in our struggle, it is possible. Thank you so much. And now will be the next speaker.
My name is Tilman Röder. Also on behalf of the Peutinger Collegium, I would like to welcome you to this topic with the recent developments in the last few days, it became even more relevant and more important. And if you don't know yet about the Peutinger Collegium, it's a club with more than 50 years of history. And there in the entrance area, there is some information, our magazine and our program. So if you're interested, please get in touch with me.
Yeah, welcome from my side. My name is Guido Hausmann. I'm professor of history at the University of Regensburg here in Bavaria and co-chair of the Think Space Ukraine, co-organizer of this event. In 2014 and even more in 2022, it became very obvious that we lack in Germany institutionalized forms of research on Ukraine. So we need information to struggle with disinformation. And that was the background why the German Academic Exchange Council, DAAD, decided to fund 2 such centers for interdisciplinary research on Ukraine in Germany. And one is ours at the University of Regensburg. And we do research on 4 thematic fields: language, cultural heritage, flight migration, war, peace, post-war order, and economic regions. If you're interested in our work, please visit us on our website. Thank you for coming. Welcome to this very important event.
Already working? No.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, welcome everybody, ladies and gentlemen, sehr verehrte Damen und Herren. My name is Ralf Fuchs. I'm the director of the Center for Liberal Modernity, one of the organizers of this event, a Berlin-based think tank in defense and renewing liberal democracy against challenges from abroad and within. And a special welcome to our speakers, whom I will introduce in a minute, as well as to Rostislav Sukenik. He is the head of the Association of Ukrainian Organizations in Germany. We are, here he is, expecting Paul Brod, the president of the Ukrainian World Congress, and Thomas Hacker, member of the German Bundestag and president of the Thomas Dehler Stiftung, which is also hosting this event. Before we start, I would like to express my special gratitude to Dmytro Shevchenko, the Chancellor of the Ukrainian Free University, who shouldered, I would say, the major bulk of the workload in enabling this event. Thank you very much, Dmytro. The topic of our discussion, as it already was mentioned, could not be more urgent. Donald Trump's phone call with President Putin and the way he commented on it afterwards was like throwing a firebomb into a gas station. Yesterday, President Macron spoke of an electric shock for Europe. Well, I wonder how many more shocks Europe needs. Since 2014, we have lost so many years in putting Ukraine in a position of strength and taking Europe's defense into our own hands. If I get it right, President Trump has effectively terminated the previous European security order, which was based on the military protection of the United States. He has gone over the heads of Ukraine and the Europeans to announce a bilateral deal with Putin, and that should lead to the end of the war in Ukraine and normalize relations with Russia. In doing so, he has already announced that Ukraine will have to relinquish parts of its national territory and will definitely not be allowed to become a member of NATO. I guess Mr. Putin can hardly believe his luck. What Trump is offering him on a silver platter will only increase his appetite for more. Many observers are reminded of Munich 1938, when the British Premier Chamberlain had the illusion that he could save peace for our time, by throwing Czechoslovakia to Hitler. To me, this move also reminds of Yalta 1945, the division of Europe between Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill. And this is exactly the world which Putin wants to go back to. But complaining won't help, so what can we do to stop things from turning out the way Putin and Trump imagine? We want to discuss these topics with 4 excellent experts, which I have the pleasure to introduce now. Michael McFaul, former American diplomat, ambassador in Moscow from 2012 to 2014, professor at the Stanford University, and one of the leading US experts on Russia and Ukraine. welcome Michael, please join us. Pablo Klimkin, co-founder of the Center for National Resilience and Development, former ambassador to Germany and then foreign minister of Ukraine, and a good friend of us. Pablo, please. Michael Gala, member of the European Parliament, the group of the European People's Party and spokesman on foreign affairs. Welcome. And last but not least, Robin Wagner, also member of the German Bundestag with the Green Party, special representative of the German government for, I abbreviate a little bit, cooperation with the civil society in Eastern Europe, South Caucasus, and Central Asia, and an outspoken friend of Ukraine. Welcome. So we will have no longer introductory speaks, but want to immediately go into the issues of the day, which we are all, I think, obsessed with and busy with in the last days. And I would like to start with the question: what does this move by Donald Trump mean for Europe, for Ukraine, and for NATO? Is this the final blow to Ukraine and the West? And I would like to start with Pablo Klimkin. Pablo, how is this perceived in Ukraine? What are the thoughts and the political, what is the political assessment and which kind of answers do you now discuss in Ukraine?
Good evening. The mic is
Yeah,
So
it seems to work.
okay.
Yeah.
No, it's so.
I'm testing.
Okay,
You should not
Now?
switch it off.
No,
still no. It's okay.
then share with Martin.
Maybe you can change the mic.
Testing. Now,
2, 3. This
No,
one works.
no. Mr. Gala.
it should be sense of Russian conspiracy maybe. Hopefully does not work along here in Munich. Good evening, everybody. As Ukrainians, we have binary mentality. For us, it's either yes or no. It's either victory or defeat. And we have a special sense of understanding ourselves as people with values. So it does hurt, of course, emotionally. I mean, politically, yes, but also emotionally, not just of the substance, but also of the way how it had been approached, for sure. It's a lot of emotional waves going now through the Ukrainian society. But it's also very important for us to have this feeling that Europe is there. Europe is Europe. It's now almost common sense to quote whom Elon Musk probably once he said that the future should look like a future. And my point, Europe should become Europe again, in the sense of one common position, with the clear idea what Europe wants, because Ukraine is Europe. So for Europe, it should be sort of fundamental point to understand why and how Europe has to engage and has to care about Ukraine with a clear position what Europe wants, and not with just dragging down. So fundamentally, Europe should get out of this idea. Let's try to create some sense of uncertainty and be as clear as possible, not just towards Putin, but also towards everybody else, towards US, towards the Chinese, and say that Europe is ready to become relevant again. And my second point is about mobilization. It's about societal mobilization, it's about emotional mobilization. It's about clear understanding that the previous post-Soviet model does not work anymore. The whole idea of security, whether Europe needs nuclear deterrence, whether Europe needs something else, it's all relevant points now. It's not just good discussions Mike and myself have been having for years in all good conferences. So if they are real issues now, let's confront real issues. And Ukraine is a real issue for Europe. For me, it's existential, not just for us, but also for Europe. And the better Europe gets it, the better it's going to be for the fate of Europe and for Ukraine as part of Europe.
Thanks a lot. Michael McFall, what is your reading? First, of Trump's move. Of course, everybody who was serious could expect something like that. It came not out of the blue, but maybe the way it was done. As Pablo said, it was not just about the content, also the way it was exercised and the way he commented afterwards. I mean, this was really over the top. So what is your reading of that? And what do you think will be the long-term consequences, the impact of that move?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I also have to be at an event at 6:30 back in the other building. So when I sprint out of here, it's not out of disrespect. I'm just going to be late. So I apologize for that. I don't know, and nobody knows. So that's the first thing. Everybody who says they know, they don't know. And part of it is because I don't believe Mr. Trump himself, President Trump, knows himself. You know, in my country, there's always this big debate. Is he this grand strategist moving and shaking things in these different ways? Or is he just kind of responding to what he just read or what somebody told him? I'm in the second camp. I don't think he has a grand strategy for how to bring peace to Ukraine. I think he's moving off the cuff, but with certain principles that I want to be clear. If you don't know my position, I categorically disagree with. So Mr. Vance just gave a big speech about how we should be able to have no censorship. So I'm here as an American to tell you I disagree with his policy. I disagree with everything my vice president just said. And as long as we have a democracy, I'm going to continue to say that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the analysis of that speech unless you want me to. We'll do that later because you asked me a different question. Let me talk about the short term and then the long term. The short term was, in my opinion, I've negotiated with the Russians before. I've negotiated with the dictatorship of Vladimir Putin's country. And the first rule of negotiating, you have too, by the way, the first rule of negotiating with these guys is everything is going to be transactional. And if you give a little bit, they put it in their pocket. I was part of the New START negotiations, right? So we negotiated a big treaty, a negotiation, an arms control treaty, by the way, that was good for Russia, good for the United States, and I think good for the world. But what I learned in that experience is you give anything, it goes in the pocket, and they say, what more are you going to give me now? So for Mr. Trump and his administration to say, Pavlo, your country, you have to give up territory. NATO, you cannot let Ukraine into NATO. And third, there will be no American troops as part of any peacekeeping. That's 3 gifts to Putin before the negotiations have even started. And so even if there might have to be that trade space, that's for the Ukrainians ultimately to decide, none of us. It's just bad tactics. And now they're trying to say, oh, you didn't really mean it. Once you've said it, you've lost it. You've lost that leverage. So the tactical piece, I think, was a big mistake. Second tactical mistake. Of course, he should have called President Zelensky first before calling President Putin. Of course, he should have talked to our allies here in Europe before talking to Putin. That was a tactical mistake, number 2. But the number 3, and this I think is the most important thing. Trump wants to do a deal with Putin. He's liked this guy for a long time. That's very consistent. As Ralph said, nobody should be surprised by that. But he's never done a deal with Putin. He's actually never negotiated a treaty. He's never actually done anything substantive. And what I think he's going to find is that Putin's not going to do a deal with him. And by the way, if they negotiate something in Saudi Arabia, they meet and they agree, there's 2 other big actors that will have a say in that. The most important actor are the people of Ukraine. And this notion, I was just with a bunch of your warriors today, Pablo, this notion that Trump and Putin are going to decide what they're going to do, that is nonsense. That is not going to happen. And therefore, he won't get the deal he wants. And the other part is Europe. There's just such a paradox right now where the Trump administration, including just today with the vice president, comes and lectures you all how you're supposed to conduct your democracy, as if we're a model of democracy right now, by the way. And then he's going to tell you about your security and how you need to do this without actually having you part of that negotiation. That will not work. And I think that will backfire. The long term, though, and it worries me the most. I believe, as an American, it is in America's national interest to have a strong NATO alliance. It is in America's national interest to have a close relationship with the EU. It is in America's national interest to have a strong, independent, and free Ukraine. I actually believe in the long term, Ukraine will be a major supplier of security to the entire alliance. Right now, they have to import. But 5 years from now, they have the best army in Europe right now. They have the biggest army in Europe right now. We, and you all as Europeans, should want them. I most certainly, as an American, want that. What I worry about is, will there be so much damage in the next 4 years that what I want will no longer be available the next time we have an American administration that believes the same things that I do. I don't believe that. This is going to be a tough time, but I am not in the camp that says this is all over, there's no NATO, there's no transatlantic relationship. And I can tell you, as an American, I'm going to fight every single day to try to make the case that I just said here to the people of America. Because I want you to know that, yes, President Trump won the election. Fantastic. I congratulated him right away. We should all do that. He should have done that in the last election too, by the way. But half of America does not agree with him. Half of America did not vote for him. And the notion that we have all accepted his view of the world, and now you Europeans have to do the same thing, we're going to push back. I suspect there will be pushback here. And so I don't know where the long term is going, but I know that I'm going to fight for a different long term.
Thanks a lot. Michael Gala, would you agree what Pablo now and others in the last days frequently stated, that this is a moment of truth for Europe and a kind of watershed moment, yeah, that either Europe will get its things together and really will position itself as a political power, political and military power, willingly to act or it will only be a punching ball than Putin and Trump. And I would like to hear from you as a German European politician. First, what do you think Europe can and must do now? And who can do it?
Yeah.
Who can do it?
Well, first of all, I would agree it is a watershed moment. It is a moment of truth. And if I listen to those who represent the European Union, I think the speech of Mrs. von der Leyen today was ambitious enough. And I can only say, I hope that on the government side, on the council side, they follow suit. And hopefully that after a German election, then we are able to act again. For us, I mean, the largest country should be somehow in the lead and not hide behind others. We should be also leading by example when it comes to our defense expenditure long term. That is the one thing. Now, when I come specifically to my institution, the European Parliament, I can fortunately say that we have, I would say that we are the most supportive institution, and for a long while. I mean, we have already in 2014, after Crimea, said very clearly what we ought to do and what we ought not to do. We have always been against Nord Stream 2, as we are here in Germany. Let there be no doubt with this parliament. And we have always said when the run-up to the full-scale war, I recall calls on the Council, on the Commission, prior to the full-scale war, to deliver weapons. We thanked the US and Britain at the time, who were the only ones who delivered already prior to the full-scale war. And we have been the ones pushing both for candidate status and for start of negotiations, and also naming specifically that both memberships in EU and NATO. So as far as the political demands are concerned, we are with a broad majority very much in favor. And now it's up to our executive side. They have to do now what where in case the US is not delivering, whereas in another meeting I was informed the 60 billion Biden package that is being delivered. Still, it's not stopped yet, so it's ongoing. So that's good, and it had been approved. I mean, in the Congress, so that should be going ahead. We need to step up our defense efforts. We have done already a lot, but we are by no means there where we have to be, and we have also said it quite clearly that we, well, on what the civilian part is concerned, that is going smoothly. I'm the rapporteur also for the 50 billion Ukraine facility that since last year is quarter by quarter being implemented, delivered the money, where we keep the country running through these financial means. And we insist on the continuation of the reform process that is for the civilian part. And that is also, I think, very important to retain. It's not only, it is essential, the military, of course, but it's not only that. When we want to credibly get Ukraine closer and closer and eventually then into the European Union, the work has now to be done also in spite of the war, and there is a lot of delivery in this regard. So for these aspects, I'm optimistic on the resolve of the institutions. When it comes to the continuation and upgrade of the arms deliveries, well, one thing I think with regard to the US has by no means been excluded. Prior to these latest statements, I had the impression that President Trump might perhaps take a position to say, okay, it's a war in Europe, it's your turf, but we Americans are happy to deliver any weapons you need for Ukraine, and you pay for it, and it's fine. So, and I think that is still not yet excluded. And what is also still not yet fixed, I mean, I was also, as all of us, astonished and outraged about there's so many positions have in public prior to the negotiations been, well, given up at least verbally. I'm still convinced in the run-up to any Saudi talks, where we'll have a phase of that there are still some adults in the preparation phase. So in Riyadh or wherever the preparations are. And I cannot imagine that all the diplomatic skills and negotiation experience of the US will simply be left to this one person. But in the run-up to any talks, there will already be different and differentiated positioning, which give also a leverage and discretion to negotiate. And at the end, and that is the European position, it must be a result that Ukraine can accept. It's not about Putin and Trump to accept. It's about Ukraine to accept and us Europeans, because it's on our continent and it's our future. And what the Ukrainians cannot deliver now, what we don't enable them now, it will fall on us also militarily. And that is not a good perspective. So we must now get our acts together and do what is necessary.
Well, I think we all agree that there cannot be a deal without Ukraine, and that Ukraine finally not only has to accept, has to decide what is acceptable and what not. But this seems to be only half-truths as long as we don't enable Ukraine to negotiate from a position of strength. This was already the major lesson from Minsk, and the Minsk agreements from 2014 to 2015, when Ukraine was with the back on the wall, immediate risk of a military collapse. And I would say, if we continue with this kind of half-hearted support, we will provoke another situation like that, maybe in a half year or in a year from now. So the question is, what can we do in short and medium term to give Ukraine the upper hand on the front lines? Because this will finally decide on the outcome of political negotiations. Robin.
What we can do is grow up and to take the initiative we have to take at the moment. But first of all, let me thank you, Michael McFord, for what you said. As when I came here, I was very much in doubt of two aspects in the title of the podium. The first aspect was whether there still is, or there still can be, some kind of a Western strategy, or do we see a disintegration of the democratic West at the moment? And the second aspect is whether there is a possibility for a way out of a war when Russia is still convinced that it needs war desperately. Maybe on the long term, not a military war in Ukraine, but it needs the confrontation and it needs insecurity. But at least for the first part, you clearly pointed out to me what was also what I was convinced of, that we need the Western alliance on the long term, and that there are still enough actors on both sides of the Atlantic to keep up a strong democratic alliance on both sides of the Atlantic, and that we have to stand together. But what I think when the next administration might be there, it will be a different alliance we have. And it has to be, in order to be there, it has to be an alliance with two grown-up partners on both sides, because that is what we have to learn right now. We see two moves. I do not yet see the strategy at the moment, because that was the initial question, what is the strategy we see? I don't see the strategy at the moment, but what I see is two moves. The first move is by Donald Trump, that the common principle we had is no longer valid, that all ways to Moscow have to lead through Kiev, and that we will not negotiate anything without those who are clearly on our side on that. And the second one, that is what we heard today by Vice President Vance, is, I think, the new idea that the strength of our alliance depends on the closeness to MAGA movement in our governments. And that is something that clearly should warn us. there is no clear commitment to the alliance without respect to how close to MAGA we are, and that is what we have to face. And the third part, and we could have been prepared for that, and we should have been prepared for that, is the idea that America is no longer willing to freely or without any fees guarantee European security by American paying by American citizens. And that is something that has been said by Democrats all the way, that has been said by Republicans, and we could have seen the strategic overstretch perhaps then, but we were not really willing to see what has been emerged. And now it is mixed up with this America First ideology, and it comes as a shock, but we could have seen it before. And that is also one part of our growing up. We have to learn to also prepare for the bad scenarios that may happen and not always hope for the other scenarios that are there. And that is our problem, that we have not prepared for them. And what we have to do right now is take up responsibility, because if we do not do that, we are not on the table on what is happening in history at the moment. And those who are not at the table are on the menu. And I do not want that to happen for Ukraine. And I do not want that to happen for Europe as well. So we have to give up and take the responsibility, and we are ready for that. It's more a question of willingness and of confidence in the economic strength of European Union. I mean, we are clearly much more stronger than Russia is at the moment, and we have to be confident in that, and then we can make it to take up that responsibility. That is up to us at the moment.
I would like to have a quick round now on the question to what should be the essentials for negotiations with Russia. Yeah, what should be negotiated and what should not be on the negotiation table. Could you briefly define your essentials, your key points? What the Ukrainian and Europeans now should find common ground and then try to convince the US. Pablo, what would you say from a Ukrainian perspective?
For Putin?
Yeah.
I think that works.
Now, okay. For Putin, it's clearly about destroying Ukraine as such. I mean, statehood, nation, DNA, basically everything. And he clearly understands it's something which matters for his regime, because he believes in a kind of missionary Russian civilization. And how can you present this project without Ukraine being bad? And if you can't get it over into your project, you have to destroy it. It's a very simple choice. There is no way around. So in any sort of possible negotiations, for me, it's about not restricting our sovereignty. Sovereignty is a fundamental point. The first critical point is not to accept, whether legally or politically, any sort of Putin's clout around our territories and around our people. And for me, it's what I would call territorial sovereignty. The second point is about our choice. It's about our foreign policy sovereignty. We can't be deprived of making our own choices. And whether we're gonna join EU or NATO tomorrow, after tomorrow, in 1 year, whatever, it should be our choice, and it should be EU and NATO choice. Under no condition Russian choice or Russia influencing it. The third fundamental point is about our sovereignty, our right to defend ourselves. It's about our army, it's about our security, it's about our military potential, it's about everything. Under no condition we can agree on restricting our potential. And the fourth fundamental point is not to restrict our DNA, our sense of the country, our sense of the nations. And people in the Kremlin still believe they could impose federative model, Russian language as official here and there, creating a sort of picture of trying to disrupt different regions and different people, sort of sense of our historic perception of ourselves and our Europeans. So it's about not letting Russia to restrict our sovereignty. And I would mention these four fundamental points. I could add up more, and everybody here can add up more there. But on four of these points, restricting our sovereignty is a way to nowhere. So I would probably start with describing this fundamental issue, and it's existential issue for us. But in the same way, what I've argued here, it's existential issue for Europe. If Europe and the West as such allows to restrict someone's sovereignty, the whole sense of the reality we exist gonna be like in the famous Matrix movie. So we live in a kind of comfortable reality, and everything around ourselves is something fundamentally dangerous. And if we let this dangerous reality to start influencing it, there is no way to stop them, because Mike has mentioned that any sort of negotiations with the Kremlin are possible, of course, but from the point of strength. And now it has become a kind of mantra. But we need to define what does it mean, to have our strengths, our Ukrainian strengths, European strengths, and the Western strengths. Without a clear definition and without telling Putin it's our strengths, and we're gonna stick to our strengths, not kind of trying to keep our position uncertain. It would be difficult to show it up, because what I learned in my humble career as diplomat and politician, if you have your leverage, if you have your strengths, show your strengths. And if you can't show your strengths, you don't have any strengths. So show your strengths, define your strengths and show your strengths, and make these strengths it's our common strengths. I mean, I understand it sounds probably a bit more optimistic when we're gonna implement it in our negotiations, but it's not just possible. It's the only way forward, and not just for Ukraine, for everybody else in the world.
Thank you, Matt. Comment from your perspective?
Yeah. I think it's
Short comment is I agree with Pavlo. The longer comment, just to add one thing that I think has been a strategic mistake in this negotiation, is when we allow the Russians and Putin to have sovereignty over what we do. And Pablo mentioned on purpose, remember, I maybe am one of the few people that watched Putin's speech, his 71-minute speech to the very end before he invaded your country. But he made very clear, Putin's a very blunt guy, by the way, when you talk to him. He's very blunt. He made very clear what he wanted to get out of this war, and one was to take over all of your sovereignty, but 2 was denazification, and 3 was demilitarization. And I think that to deny him where the ceasefire agreement, the border is, that's to be negotiated between Ukrainians and Russians. And I want to say one more time, I always feel very uncomfortable saying what Ukrainians should do. Ultimately, it's the people of Ukraine and the democratically elected government of Ukraine are the ones that have to decide what the deal is. It's not for people like me to say. But with that caveat, denying those things, I agree completely. But on the sovereignty piece, it should be for us as well. And I think that we have allowed Putin to somehow become a veto player in NATO. That's very bad. Why did we do that? Just remind you, in 1949, we didn't ask Stalin for permission to create NATO. In 1955, we didn't ask Khrushchev and his folks whether West Germany should become a member. And by the way, there were critics in the West that said, oh, you're going to do that and you're going to poke the Russian bear. And even people as prestigious as George Kennan, a former ambassador to Moscow as well, that's what he said. That turned out to be wrong. By the way, my country in 1953, when the end of the war, it wasn't a peace deal, but the end of the war in Korea happened, the same day we signed a peace agreement with South Korea. We didn't ask the North Koreans for permission to do that, and that's helped to keep the peace ever since. And I just feel like we've lost this argument that somehow if Ukraine is a member of NATO, then Putin is going to invade further. I just think that is wrong analytically. I think it is absolutely wrong analytically. And I think there should be a peace negotiation between Ukraine and Russia, maybe mediated by Europeans and the Americans. And that day, whatever that will be a tragic day, but also it'll be a day when you have a lot of your sovereignty. Ukraine, in my view, has already won this war if it ends now. But then the next day, not related to that at all, we talk about what our security relationship is with Ukraine, provided the United States is still in NATO, by the way. I hope that is true. That is a bad joke, but as we leave, maybe you can take over. But I just think linking those things was a big mistake. And I do not think ever that somehow if Ukraine became a member of NATO the day after the war ended, that he would invade again. Just the opposite. Just the opposite. You think Putin, Russia and the Soviet Union, just to remind everybody, has never attacked a member of NATO. They are struggling right now to stay on the battlefield with this incredibly courageous but not well-armed Ukrainian army. You think that army wants to take on the biggest alliance in the world, anchored by the largest and most powerful military in the world? Absolutely not. Tragically, the train has left the station, as they say. This is an argument that because President Trump does not agree with it, it's just my view. But I think in the long term, we need to disentangle that and reclaim our sovereignty over our security, not with Putin at the table.
Yes. Why did we, the Europeans, 3 years after the full-fledged Russian aggression against Ukraine, never managed to come to terms what are our goals and what is our interest in the end game of the war? We never did it together. Of course, the Poles did it, and the Baltics, some other Central Eastern European countries who dared to talk that Ukraine must win the war, what our Chancellor never intentionally did. So there was never unity in Europe, and there was never unity also within NATO. What are the goals and what are the red lines regarding the outcome of this war? Do you think that we can now, in a kind of fast forward move, achieve such a consensus?
Well, I think the goals of any agreement is, of course, that, as it was said earlier, that Ukraine remains sovereign and not limited in its sovereignty with regard to its alliances that it would like to take, or memberships in the European Union. That is one thing that we must retain and will retain, I'm pretty sure. I think also, that's my opinion, and I think there must be a consensus on that, as long as any part of Ukrainian territory is still occupied by Russia, we should not lift our sanctions. Yeah, I mean, there is no return to business as usual, just if there is a kind of ceasefire. Yeah, that is not business as usual. And I think the fact that we didn't have really, well, in a way, I mean, we had unanimity on making Ukraine a candidate and unanimity to start the accession negotiations. These were two important political signals. We could also have not had that, but I'm glad that we had it. I mean, it doesn't help in the war on the front line, but it says clearly, you belong to us, you will be with us, and whenever it is possible, we will get you in, or at least this part of Ukraine that is under government control, and leave it open for the rest, as it was, well, not as in the same way, but similar with East Germany. We never recognized the GDR full scale, and it was clear that they could get the easy way into the EU simply by acceding to West Germany. And as soon as there is a solution on Cyprus, the rest will also be fully applied inside the EU. And if at some point we have hopefully a very large part of Ukraine inside the EU, when the rest can join, that will be done. That must legally and politically be open. There must not be any doubt. But the fact that we didn't get there already, so I mean, there were too many in Germany, and I'm not only blaming the hesitant chancellor or so, but the German economy as well. There were too many still around who thought, it would be so nice if we could get back to our nice businesses that we had with the Russians. And that is one of the reasons that we have over all the years, and I'm also saying after Crimea, that we haven't been that consequent. Also part of it is to be attributed to the different German governments. We have always been open about that in the parliament, but well, we are not the executive side, as I said before, but we have now all the reason to say and speak out clearly what the objectives are, what the means are, and what we will definitely never accept.
I would even say that major parts of the German political class not only are looking with one eye at the perspective of normalization, political and economic relations with Russia, but they have been maybe even more afraid of a Russian defeat than of a Russian success. Yeah, the fear of a Russian defeat, yeah, be it because of military escalation or because of a potential collapse of the Russian regime, I think this is also a factor we have to deal with. Yeah, and that it's much more dangerous for Europe and Germany if Putin will go away even with half a victory from this aggression than if they would have to leave Ukraine. So, Robin, we are in the midst of an electoral, or in the end phase of an electoral campaign. If you're looking to the way the war in Ukraine, our security policy issues are addressed in this electoral campaign, give that you any optimism that the new government will take a more determined position?
Well, being in the election campaign, I could say this would be the easiest answer. I could say that the Russian intelligence in their strategy paper clearly pointed out that there is one party in Germany that has no sympathy at all for this Russian regime, and that there is no one to link for them in this party, and that is the Green Party. But that is the easiest, would be the easiest answer for me right now at the moment.
This was not a partisan question.
No. And what I think the very important part that whatever the government after the election will be, what we have to clearly look out for is that there is no coming back of the old ideas of the Moscow connections that were strong in the SPD clearly, but also in the Conservative Party. There were the actors of the Moscow connection. And we have to be very clear as German citizens that there is no more way back to power for these ideas. And also that we have that we can overcome in the next government the fears that you described, and that we managed to not lose the focus on the threat Russia is to us. And we are very easily tempted to lose focus. We see it in the election campaign, and there pops this topic, this topic, this topic, and so we are not talking very much about the military and hybrid threat that is directed against us here in Germany. And so we really have to try to find the focus on that again. And that will be one of the biggest and most important tasks for the new government in a phase where, as I said in the previous round, we have to grow up as a country and take on this responsibility. And we have to take this responsibility in order to ensure that, and that is, I think, the most important, that there are two red lines that not have to be crossed. And one is the sovereignty of Ukraine, and that also means the red line of the constitution of Ukraine, which also has the clear direction towards full Euro-Atlantic integration. And we as German Bundestag made that very clear with very strong voices from all of the democratic middle. And we have the very clear commitment in the European Union for the EU part of Ukraine, without having any veto player in the East. And we will not accept any veto player for the EU part. And I hope we find back to the NATO idea of strength, that we don't accept any veto players for NATO decisions. And the other red line that is in our own interest is that we have to be very careful that there is no agreement of whomever that threatens freedom and stability in Europe. And there may be different interpretations of freedom, and mine is not a libertarian interpretation of freedom, but it's a freedom for something, not freedom from, but more freedom for, and a freedom of responsibility. But nevertheless, we have this idea of freedom, and we will never accept any agreement that interferes with that. But for that, we need a strong German government, because in Europe, for strong Europe, we need a strong connection of a German government and of a French government and of a Polish government as a motor in Europe, in order to be at the table, in order to negotiate that as partners of the United States. For transactional activities, maybe at the moment with this administration, but still as partners there in a transactional way to peace and stability in Europe.
Thanks a lot. Michael, before we open the floor for some questions and remarks from our audience, I would like to ask you, with your experience and your knowledge of both sides of the Atlantic, what would you then recommend to the Europeans? How should we approach now the Trump administration? And how can we get into kind of serious political dialogue to find common ground, if at least try to do it? Or would you recommend would be the other position in the debate, which is also already articulated? We should disconnect and only rely on ourselves.
Well, I liked what my colleagues said earlier, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think a stronger Europe is good for Ukraine and good for the United States. My next book is coming out in the fall. I hope you'll invite me back and I'll advertise it. I'll speak here. It's called Autocrats versus Democrats. And we are in a global struggle between autocrats and democrats, and their autocracies and democracies. I believe that's going to go on for a long time. And speaking as an American, the stronger allies we have, the better off we will be. So what you were talking about, I agree completely. Spend more money, be stronger, be more unified. That will be not only good for Europe and good for Ukraine, but I think it'll be better in terms of our bilateral relationship. That's the first thing. Second, I'll just put it in, I don't want to give too much advice. I feel like, who am I to be in Munich giving Germans and Europeans advice? I believe in your sovereignty too, unlike Mr. Vance who is lecturing you. So I don't want to do that. But I do think this is an important piece of how to think strategically about it. The President Trump and his team, they keep saying, at least the debate in my country is, we've got this big threat called China that we need to deal with. And so we need to pull out of Europe, right? And some people say that very, very specifically in the Trump team. We're going to shift everything to Asia, and you got to deal with everything here.
And we have to separate Russia from China by making it.
And they think they can do that too. Whereas what I would say is part of a more transactional approach. They're lecturing you all the time about what you're supposed to do in terms of disengagement with China. Well, hold on a minute. You're telling us we got to take care of this, but you want our help with China. That's just in their language. It's not my language, but in their language, that's not a good deal. So I would be stronger on, if you want us to play with you on China, we need to be more cooperative here in Europe. In a just purely kind of Trumpian way of thinking about transactions. And the second thing, I mean, it is an argument that they're going to make about there is this hope among certain people around Mr. Trump, President Trump, and maybe him himself, that we're somehow going to peel Putin away as part of our realpolitik balancing against China. This is the kind of Nixon argument, how we did this with China. That's not going to happen. That's naive beyond all belief. Putin will never pivot away from his close autocratic friend to take a chance with us. And 4 more years, guys like me might be in the government, right? He's not that naive. He's not going to do that. We're too volatile. And I think to disabuse them of that idea early on would be a good one. And the last thing I would say, something Pablo said I think is really important. Putin needs war with us. He needs constant war with us. We are the enemy. I personally am the enemy. That's what he's been telling his people for a long time. So this idea that he can walk away from that and pivot and start working with Trump, I actually don't think he can do that. And I think if you could help educate this new team, remember they don't have a lot of experience. So, Mr. Vance, he's new to this job. Mr. Hegseth is new to this job. I think to help educate, that's a too strong a word, to help us talk together about what motivates Putin, that would be useful because tragically you have more experience with it, and tragically the people of Ukraine have more experience with it. Maybe that's too idealistic, but I know that is true. I know that he needs us as an enemy, and I think this notion that we're going to somehow flip and that we're all going to be friends, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. So now we have the opportunity for very few questions. If you would take the floor, please introduce yourself briefly and be brief. So we will start with Polkra. No, you should not take mine.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul Grod, Ukrainian World Congress. One thing that
President Trump has said a number of very troubling things over the last 24 hours. One thing that we have not really addressed, which I quite frankly think is one of the most troubling things he said, is that we should invite Russia back into the G7. And I think that that is a really significant backsliding, and that is opening up business as usual in a major, major way. And so I'd love to hear your comments on that, and quite frankly, how do we stop that? Because that will completely turn the world order back to business as usual. Thank you.
Okay, we will collect some questions. Einfach gehen Sie einfach ein bisschen von vorne nach hinten.
Hello, I'm Valentin Spernov, just a Ukraine activist, private activist in Munich. My question to the European politicians here is, we talked about what can be done, but I didn't hear anything like, what about the 300 billion? What about secondary sanctions against Kyrgyzstan? What about stopping the shadow fleet? I didn't hear anything like concrete. What is your view on that? Because we asked this question 1 year ago, ahead of the European elections, to every major candidate. And nothing has happened since. And now Europe could do it any day. Any day it could send the 300 billions. Any day it could impose sanctions on Kyrgyzstan, stop delivering arms parts there, which go to Russia. Any day we could stop the shadow fleet. Any day. When does it happen? Second question to all of you, must there be a deal? Everybody talks about the deal. The deal. How shall it be? Must there be a deal? I think there mustn't. Was there a deal with Hitler? There wasn't even a deal with the Kaiser, and the Kaiser wasn't a monster like Putin or Hitler. There was no deal. It was just done. Thank you.
Gehen Sie jetzt mal ganz nach hinten, der Fairness halber. Genau, die junge Dame da, ja.
Thank you very much. Elena Krasnoshtan. I'm from Ukrainian NGO, International Center for Ukrainian Victory. Just to follow up on the previous question, I wanted to ask about the frozen Russian assets and 300 billion. Is it not the time to move forward on that decision? And one question to the American speaker. I mean, I think that in this room we all agree with a lot of the arguments that you presented, but my question is how to pass these messages and arguments to people like G.D. Vance or Trump himself, who is basically on NATO spreading Russian propaganda and misinformation that Russia attacked Ukraine because of NATO membership.
Yeah.
If it's not for NATO, Russia would attack us for EU membership, because I would remind 2013 DCFTA agreement and how Putin was mad about that. So I think if we take NATO out of decision, the next thing will be EU. So how do we pass these messages to the leadership of the US? Thank you.
Und der junge Mann davor, oder? Okay.
I'm Sebastian Klisch. I am nobody. I do have a question though regarding negotiations. It has been a year or two now, that there's always been the idea about having a negotiation, and also Zelensky's peace plan and how he plans to win. But I heard a lot of not giving something. Like we can't give. I understand that we can't give Putin the feeling that he's winning. But how do you negotiate without giving anything?
So, should we have a short round of answers on the panel? Who wants to start? Pablo, maybe you take the question, why a deal? Why not, I'm overstating a little bit, just putting all our efforts on Russia's defeat?
We have to share it basically as Europeans. I wanted to go for 1 second to Pablo's question about G7. And I have to say, I'm kind of worried that this proposal is there, but I'm not really worried about Putin joining back, because in my understanding, he doesn't need it anymore. He believes he belongs to the different reality now. He can be part of both worlds. I mean, the world Mike has described as, let's call it autocracy, the world we live in. So getting back and basically compromising everything Putin has achieved in his way in a fundamentally different direction. But the mere fact that this idea had been voiced is of course not really pleasant in the sense of negotiations. I mean, if we do have negotiations from a position of strength, of course it's about some trade-offs, but it's not about concessions. So fundamentally, if you concede something to Putin, the Russian mentality and Russian logic, they don't accept any concessions. The moment it's taken, they forget about it, and you need another concession. So it's like your arm, given, and after that it's your head or something else. Fundamentally, you're gonna be fed to a crocodile. So any sort of logic of concession is a fundamentally wrong one if you negotiate. And the only way how we can be successful in that is to have a very clear, not just common position, the Western position, but also a very clear understanding what we want to achieve. And we have to say, publicly saying, it's basically our vision. It should not be, kind of detailed in any simple point, but it should be our vision presented to ourselves, to Putin, and to everybody else in the world. Otherwise, what's going on in this famous mantra, we're gonna support Ukraine as long as it takes, is perceived by Putin as a weakness. And to start with a weakness is basically any negotiations already failed with Putin.
But quick answer on G7, no. The reasons for kicking them out of G8 are still there, so there is no argument to take them into G7. On some of the measures that have been taken or not taken on this shadow fleet, if I'm not mistaken, several dozens of them have been identified and are totally blocked to any access or services in our ports. So they cannot actually profit from any services that are there. I wonder, as they are mostly some Caribbean or Pacific flag states, whether we cannot engage with these states who are probably getting a lot of support from us, and at least get there that they scratch them from their what is it?
And look for the owners behind.
And look for the owners behind, of course, and sanction them. That could definitely be done.
In Greece and in Cyprus, yes.
And on the 300 billion, I really think. And not only of the interest rates of windfall, but of the substance, I really think there should be a possibility to seize it as a reprisal, as this method in diplomacy as Russia has violated every international law and standards, that we should use that as an argument. Now, I'm not so much in the details what our people, be it in the Commission or the External Action Service or wherever they dwell around this idea, whether it's possible or not, but it should definitely be done. And I think also there is not that much property that we still have in Russia, which then they would, of course, in return then also seize. but I think it would be better to get it to do it and to transfer the money directly to Ukraine.
So I agree with my colleagues. I just add a few things on the G7. I think what you see with that case and with many other things that are happening with the first weeks of the Trump administration is they're running a shock and awe strategy. They're just doing everything, right? We're going to invade Greenland, and we're going to then take over the Panama Canal, and we're going to make Canada the 51st state, and we're going to invite Putin into the G8, and we're going to have all these tariffs now on your countries. They're just going really, really fast. They think that they have a mandate from the American people to do all this, and they think that they have, I call it bully diplomacy, that they have the power to dictate the terms to other countries to go along. My prediction, and I'm going to be part of this fight, is they have overextended. They've overreached their mandate within my country, and I think they are really overreaching on the international stage. So guess what? There's 6 other democracies in the G7. They're not going to go along, and Trump can bully the Colombians to let our military planes land there. That's what he did. He bullied them, and he said, you have to do this or we're going to cut you off. And they made a decision based on the balance of power between the United States and Colombia, where we're better off to let these planes land. But the G6, they're not going to roll over because Trump tells them he wants to. That's not going to happen. And I hope that will be true in many of these other domain spaces we're talking about. And then on the assets and the, I coordinate a working group on sanctions. We wrote our paper about taking the assets 3 years ago. So yes, it's long overdue, but maybe this moment of ripeness for Europe will speed up that process because this money is here, and I hope that's true. And same with the fleet, and same with Kazakhstan. There are lots of good ideas. We should just keep implementing them. And they are having consequences. Do not believe the myth that the sanctions are not having consequences. We just should do better sanctions faster and enforce them in a more significant way. And then finally on the deal question, again, it sounds like you're from Ukraine, and I'm not going to tell Ukrainians whether.
I'm not from Ukraine.
Oh, you're not? Okay. But I think it's an important alternative way to frame things. Because right now we're in this fever about a deal because Trump has promised it. But one can imagine that the Ukrainians might decide that a quick deal is not in their national interest. And I think that hypothesis, that alternative way of thinking should be much more explored, but with the Ukrainians talking about it, not some American from California.
Yeah. Concerning the shadow fleet, and Michael already said that we already have increased the measures against this Russian shadow fleet. We should continue to do that, but we already have done that also in the recent past doing that. Concerning the money, I totally agree with you. We have to find ways to use this Russian money. I do not see why everyone else has to pay for the damages Russia is creating and for the defense against what they are doing, and not the Russian money paying for that and that it's secured. We should find ways in order to use this full money for that purpose. Concerning third-party states and the sanctions, I think this is a very important part to increase the effectiveness of the sanctions we have. But in addition to all the ideas of having sanctions also against states circumventing these sanctions, I think we also have to offer partnerships to these states in order not to lose states to the autocratic camp. I mean, we are talking about states who are somehow in between and who are somehow, they are in a very difficult geographical position when you look at where they are. And we have to offer partnerships, and maybe better partnerships, and maybe stronger partnerships for cooperation with these states. This is not the solution for everything, but we have to do that in order not to lose states to the wrong side, as there are these movements of trying to find different partners, not with every state, and some are going in the wrong direction, some are going in the right direction, and we have to differentiate on that. This G7 question, I think, is the most interesting one. As first of all, I also agree with the assessment that it's not that much in Vladimir Putin's interest to join this club again, as he does not really have the interest in dealing with anyone else on the global sphere except maybe the People's Republic of China and the United States, because he thinks he is as strong as these countries. And it was very intentional that I said he thinks he is. And I mean, the idea of G7 or G8 in the first place was to have economically strong states working together. And we should not once again fail to the illusion that Russia is a strong state. It is not, but it always tries to build up this image that it is. It is a very weak economy, and the only way how this economy is working at the moment is due to war and due to very ineffective and not healthy actions for an economy. They have very high inflation, they have very high no idea. Very high interest rates in Russia at the moment. So they are not economically strong. So they do not belong in this club. In addition to the fact that they do not, on a democratic value point, definitely do not belong in this club. And we have to make clear to the US administration that the United States have an interest, their own interest, in being in this G7 party, because we are economically interesting to the United States and we are interesting partners. And that also means for us to be confident in our own strength. And then we can have transactional activities with the United States, and we can make this G7 idea strong again, and we can have a strong position for ourselves to clearly say what Michael said. The answer is no to Russia being part of that party.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, and we have to finish short. So I will leave it with maybe two or three closing remarks, picking up some arguments from our conversation. The first one, I think, was quite an important common sense that if Ukraine, Europe, the US are entering negotiations with Russia to end the war, which is not illegitimate in itself, it has to be clear that the sovereignty of Ukraine is not negotiable. The domestic and the foreign policy sovereignty of Ukraine, and this is a very crucial point now for the future international order, because not only in Moscow and in Beijing, there is a return of the idea of limited sovereignty for smaller nations. Also, the Trump administration has a kind of tendency in that kind of thinking that full political sovereignty is a privilege of the big powers, and the rest of the world has to follow within the spheres of influence of these big players, and to insist on the principle of equal sovereignty. This is absolutely crucial for the future of the international order. And the second remark is on what are we talking about? Are we talking about a ceasefire, or are we talking about a peace agreement? These are fundamental different things. And I think we made a mistake in the last years that we left too much room for those who are calling for peace under ever circumstances, and finally kind of peace which will be reward the aggressor. And we have to insist that there is no peace without freedom and justice. We need a just peace which guarantees the freedom and independence of Ukraine. So I think we have to fight this battle about what are we talking about when we are calling for peace. And the last point, what Paolo said, now is the moment for Europe to show our strength. Now or never. Thank you very much.